So I'd like to welcome you to this workshop today. My name is Quartano, and I'm from the Disabled Access Friendly campaign, which is a voluntary campaign which started in Thessaloniki in Greece, co-founded by myself and Paul Shaw. And I'm going to show you today how useful this campaign can be to you in your teaching activities, how you can use material, free material that we have to raise social awareness in your classrooms. So, I think all of us, when we started teaching, we had a vision. Education is not just about acquiring skills, it's not just about acquiring knowledge, it also embraces social improvement, it talks about the promotion of well-being, of fairness, of equality, of truth, of very serious issues, because an awareness of the world in which we live and the belief that students have the power to initiate changes in the world to make it a better place lie at the heart of education. And I'm sure that you, as good teachers, want to encourage students to realize that they have the power to fill the gap between ideals and the real situation and to make improvements to the world. And you want to equip them to become adults who will take responsibility for the world and question what they see and hear. So we're going to look today at the world through the eyes of somebody with a disability. So let's look at some definitions of education. What can education do for the individual? Education is a process by which we become better human beings. And I think this is the most important aspect of education. It's a process by which character is formed, strength of mind is increased, and intellect is sharpened. And what does education do in terms of the community? It's for making our communities better. Small baby steps outside your own front door make a difference. And in terms of the big wide world, as Nelson Mandela so aptly put it, education is the most powerful tool that we have that you can use to change the world. But of course, sometimes you bear these big ideas in mind, but there are barriers that prevent you doing this. One of these barriers might be the syllabus, which means that you're following a path where teaching the difference between the present simple and the present continuous becomes more important and more pressing than opening your students' eyes to the world. The barrier may be the course book. You may be so comfortable with the course book that you may lack confidence to step outside the course book and teach something that reflects the real world. You may have pressure from the parents who say, I paid all this money for the course book, I don't want to see all the exercises half finished. And then of course there are the exams, which in many countries become so important that you lose track of what education is really about, and you think your own self-worth, your school's reputation, and your students' opinion of themselves all hangs on what mark they get at school. So I'd like to show you how the Disabled Access Friendly campaign's teaching material can help you step outside and overcome those barriers so that you can do something more related to changing the world and making it a better place. This voluntary campaign started about 3 years ago in Thessaloniki in northern Greece. And we have reached 120 countries now, so it's really grown very big. Our campaign combines English language teaching with raising awareness about mobility disability. So we're focusing on people who have difficulty in walking, difficulty in getting from one place to another, people who perhaps use a wheelchair. And our website has a big resources bank of material which is completely free that allows you to teach English and raise social awareness in the classroom at the same time, so that your students are forced to put themselves in the shoes of someone with a mobility disability so that they can understand their needs better, their feelings, they can appreciate the difficulties that they face in life, they can put themselves in their shoes and have a better understanding of these issues. So just to recap, let's have a look at this. The aim of this campaign is to sensitize learners so that they understand more about people with mobility disability. They can project themselves into someone else's position and hopefully initiate changes. So let's have a look at our website. This is the home page. It's very simple. There's no registration, no fee. It's completely free access, no passwords, no verification. You just go on the website and look for the free teaching material. We have lesson plans and we have graded reading texts at all levels that you can use with your students. Now I'm wondering, having heard that introduction, if some of you are thinking, oh well, this is a really good idea. But how can I explore these issues, these abstract, sensitive issues, with students in my classroom who are maybe only 8 or 9 years old, who have very little experience of the world, and whose level of English is quite low? It is possible. And I want to show you how a young teacher in Greece, whose name is Bonnie, who works in a private language school, I want to show you exactly how she did that, so you can see how it is possible to apply these quite big theories in a classroom of, let's say, 8-year-olds. Bonnie introduced the subject by showing the children a storybook. She showed them this illustration which shows a group of young children, and you can see that one of the children is a wheelchair user, but she didn't point that out. She just asked a question. She said, which of these children do you think doesn't like doing sports? And unsurprisingly, her class of 8-year-olds, they all picked the wheelchair user. So this led quite easily onto a lesson where she was exploring, in terms of language, the use of can and can't. And she showed her students various images of a wheelchair user doing quite challenging sports. Now, even young children are familiar with this kind of image because maybe they've seen things from the Paralympic Games. And the lesson was about this young girl whose name is Helen, how she can play basketball, she can play tennis, she can do this, she can do these challenging activities. After these challenging activities, this young wheelchair user Helen and her friend Jenny wanted to go to Jenny's house to relax. And Bonnie showed them a photograph of Jenny's house. Now, she didn't need to say anything, but we have the first example of can't, because Helen, who uses a wheelchair, can't go to Jenny's house to do something so simple as just hang out together and relax after the challenging sports. So that was a very easy way and a very subtle, non-threatening, inobtrusive way of introducing the idea to very young children that there are problems with infrastructure. Now, all our lessons come with a very teacher-friendly grid, which you can see here. Welcome, do come and take a seat. Which shows which level the lesson is aimed at, the age group, a brief overview of the grammar and vocabulary items that we're covering. Now, those were talking about concrete issues, about infrastructure. At a more abstract level, we can also introduce ideas about mobility disability, ideas concerning attitudes and behavior, even to very young learners. In order to explain this more easily to you, I want to ask you if you'd like to come and sit here. Would you mind? Thank you very much. And your friend, would you like to come? And I'd like you to come and stand here next to your friend. Now, this young lady uses a wheelchair, and this young lady is her friend, her companion, who is helping her. And I just want to give you some examples now of kind of attitudes and behavior, what happens very often when people are talking to a wheelchair user. Now, this is what happens usually. Hi, oh, you use a wheelchair. That must be so difficult for you. It must be so difficult at this conference because I don't know if I've seen any ramps. It must be really difficult for you to get around town. I can see that's a really big problem for you. You know, my mother, she broke her leg once and she was in a wheelchair for 10 days, so I know how difficult that must be for you. You see, what happens very often is that people focus the conversation on somebody's disability. Now, if this young lady were really a wheelchair user, she would have heard this conversation many, many times, and she already knows that it's quite difficult to get around, and always talking about it is not very appropriate. It would be much nicer to talk about everyday things like, are you enjoying the sunshine, or are you having fun at the conference, or what are you doing tonight? Not always talking about somebody's difficulties in life. You poor thing, it must be really hard. I really feel bad for you. And I know my intention is good. I'm trying to show sympathy, but the impact I have on this girl is actually quite negative, because I'm making a presumption that her life is really quite miserable. Does she need any help? Does she need help to get around? Is there something that I can do to help? Would you like me to help her, help move her, or, you know, is she no, she's okay. You see, this is another thing that happens, that people direct questions to a wheelchair user's companion. Instead of my asking the lady herself, do you need any help, I address the question to her friend, and this is very inappropriate. And until you see examples of this, you're unaware that maybe you yourselves do this. This is a very common example. I wanted to tell you something, that there's a really, really great restaurant in Istanbul, and I think you should try it. It's got the most marvelous disabled toilets. The toilet's got one of the special bars, the toilet's got one of the special bars so that you can lift yourself onto the toilet, and the mirror, it's just so great because the mirror is quite low, so you can see yourself in the mirror without having to look up. It's really convenient. I think you'd really like it. You know, this is another example that, again, I'm focusing on disability. And how many times do you recommend a restaurant on the basis of the toilet? Don't you usually talk about the good food, the nice atmosphere, the cheap prices, the good setting? These are some examples of not exactly mistakes, but inappropriate behavior that nobody's aware of until you have it pointed out to you. So I'd like to thank my wheelchair user and her companion very much for your cooperation there. And I want to show you how you can introduce some of these ideas into a class of very young learners. So when you're dealing with young learners, of course, it's important to use material that appeals to them, that is appropriate to their level of knowledge of the world. And here we have a lesson about a dog. Now, what do you think this lesson is going to be about? Have a look at the next picture. We see that the dog is disabled. The dog uses a sort of dog wheelchair. So the lesson is at an appropriate level for the students, the topic appeals to young children, and the text, as you will see, prompts children to think about mobility disability, because what happens is that this dog goes to the park and he plays with the other dogs, and the other dogs ask him inappropriate questions. So they say to him, oh, you poor thing. They make the presumption that the dog's life is quite miserable. They say, why do you use wheels? Why don't you use your legs? So we have this kind of example. This reading text, again, comes with a teacher-friendly key, and I have a short extract from the text which shows that we're focusing here on the present simple. So the dog has 4 legs, but his 2 back legs don't work. So he uses wheels. His dog friends in the park say, Max, why do you have wheels? It's not nice to always focus on somebody's disability like I did with this young lady here. At this very young level, our material comes with a glossary which uses pictures. At more advanced levels, of course, we use dictionary definitions. So after the reading text about this dog Max who goes to the park, we have questions which cover grammar, vocabulary, and reading comprehension. But more interestingly, we have questions that encourage critical thinking. So we ask young students to tell us which were the good questions to ask Max and which were the questions that were less appropriate. And they have to put a smiley image on the nice question, do you need any help? And the sad picture on the inappropriate question, why do you use wheels? So to consolidate this idea, we then transpose what we've learnt in the reading text about the dog to this little girl, Angela. And we have exactly the same exercise, which would be nice questions to ask Angela, who's a little girl probably much the same age as the students in the class, and which would be the inappropriate questions. So here we're learning about behavior and attitudes towards people, or in this case dogs, and we're raising awareness. All our lessons come with a key, which is useful for teachers, saves time. Of course, at this younger level, maybe not so necessary, but at later levels, it certainly is a useful tool. Now let's see what Bonnie, the teacher who used this material in her classroom in Greece, what she said after the lesson. She told us that her students previously hadn't known much about disability, so it was hard for them to care about these issues, and that's true. How can you care if you don't know? So just providing some information opens the door to caring, and that's a very good first step. And her students were now aware of simple things that made a difference. One of her students gave us some feedback after the lesson. And you can see how this 8-year-old has taken the lesson out from the classroom and she's taken it into her family. So we've taken a step into the community. Remember at the beginning I said that education is about making improvements to the community. Well, this little 8-year-old has started. I think probably this is the last time that her grandpa will park on the ramp. She says, "Please, Grandpa, don't park your ramp on the pavements." And she says to her sister, "Please don't call the children with disabilities special because they don't like it and they aren't different." So we can see the impact that this very simple lesson has had on a bunch of 8-year-olds. So let's look now at a slightly more advanced level. We'll look at some lessons for intermediate students. So we're talking about B1, B2 level, children probably about the age of 12 to 15. And we have Clementini Afthonidou, who's a teacher, again in Greece, who works in the state school system. I know that at this level, it's hard to keep teenagers' interests. Hormones are rampant, they're easily distracted, they want to play on their mobile phones. But I will show you how Clementini presented mobility disability in her classroom of teenagers. Now, she didn't go in and say, "Hello, today we're talking about disability," because probably she would have lost their interest quite quickly. She presented a lesson on basketball. And she gave her students the title of the lesson, basketball, and immediately she had engaged them because they like basketball. Greece has a great basketball team, and they were immediately interested. She didn't talk about disability, but as they started to read the text, it emerged that the article that they were reading had been written by a young basketball player who was subsequently involved in an accident, became a wheelchair user, carried on playing basketball, and this was what the lesson was about. So the disability aspect sort of came in the back door. In terms of language, the lesson concentrates on the use of past tenses. You can see some examples here. As I was driving the motorbike, the wind got under my helmet. Many examples of the past tense. And Clementini told us that her students were engaged in this lesson right till the end. And the feedback that she gave us was that mobility disability is not something that is included in the school textbook. And I'd like you to think about that. Do course books, do school textbooks reflect the real world? And in the cases where there are images of somebody in a wheelchair, are those perhaps images of the super cripples of disability? Are these the wheelchair users who win medals at the Olympic Games? Are these the wheelchair users that climb Mount Everest, although they can't walk? Are they the ones that win scholarships to Oxford University? Or are these everyday people, mothers, fathers, teachers, students, friends, in ordinary everyday situations, going to the supermarket, going for a coffee, going on holiday? This is what we want to present. We don't want to present the elite of disability. We want to present disability as just another part of human diversity. And we want to show that disability doesn't have to be the story. The fact that somebody has a disability, that doesn't need to be what our lesson is about. The lesson was about basketball. We weren't talking about disability as the story. So that's an interesting thing to think about, whether the stories that you read in the press about somebody who is disabled in some way, whether the whole issue is their disability or whether they're just presented as people with a disability but in some other role. So Clementini told us that her students put themselves in the position of the wheelchair user and tried to understand his feelings and the difficulties he faced. We're talking here about empathy. we're learning through the eyes of a disabled person. And her student told us that she thinks that everyone can do something to support these people, and she said, let's give it a try. And the reason that I've put the word everyone in bold is because that is the word I want you to concentrate on, that we can all initiate changes. In the past, the most traditional model of disability that was presented was something called the medical model of disability. And what this model of disability says is that the person who has the disability is the problem. And what we need to do is restructure that person's body. So we need to invest in medical research, we need to invest in equipment, we need to provide physiotherapy and wheelchairs and other devices. We need to cure that person, make that person's body work in the environment that we have. But of course, it isn't always possible to restructure somebody's body, and we have to take that as an inflexible parameter. The only thing that we can restructure is society. So what the social model of disability says is that we need to remove the barriers that make people disabled. Somebody is disabled by the environment and not actually by their own body. They're disabled by the fact that they cannot interact easily in an environment that hasn't taken into consideration their needs. And again, going back to that word everyone that I put in bold, everyone can initiate changes, not just doctors and medical researchers. We can all make tiny improvements that make life more comfortable and empower people with disabilities to be more integrated and fully participate in society. So let's go back to the classroom now, and I want to show you a nice lesson that allows you to, again, teach English and quite a difficult construction, and also think about infrastructure and raising social awareness. If I were now to go into the classroom and say, okay, today I'm going to teach you something actually quite difficult. Well, not quite difficult, very difficult. In fact, probably you'll never understand it. First conditional, second conditional, third conditional, zero conditional, and for those of you who still aren't happy, we have mixed conditionals. Very difficult. I'm going to put the rule on the board. If plus, you've already lost their attention. I'm going to show you a way of producing that language, the language emerging from the context. So teaching a difficult part of in the English language and also raising social awareness. Let's have a look at this kitchen. The first thing that we could do with our students is teach them the vocabulary, the tap, the cupboard, the cooker, the fridge. Okay, this is quite it doesn't need any explanation. And then we ask, imagine imagine that you're a wheelchair user. Would it be easy for you to use this kitchen? Can anybody see any problems with the kitchen? How easy would it be for the wheelchair user, for example, to open the cupboard and get their cups and plates out of the cupboard? Pretty difficult. Let me ask you something else. Wheelchair user wants to cook spaghetti. Wheelchair users at this height. Is it easy to cook spaghetti when the cooker is up here? So quite a few problems. Can he reach the freezer? Can he get out his frozen pizza? Quite a few problems. I'm sure that all of you have thought about steps and ramps. Have you ever thought about how a wheelchair user uses a kitchen? So already I'm raising your awareness about some of the difficulties that maybe you hadn't thought about. So we ask the students to think what the problems are. He can't see what he's cooking because the cooker's too high. So what can we do to improve things? And the language emerges quite naturally. If the cooker were lower, he could see what he was cooking. So this is the social model of disability. It's a very fancy term. The social model of disability says, let's change the environment. Now, of course, we can't change every kitchen, but we can change other things in the environment, which means that everybody can use them, not just people who are able to walk or don't have any kind of mobility disability. Now, as I said before, it's always important to have lessons appropriate to a student's interests and age group. Teenagers love Facebook. And we have a lesson based on Facebook, where Facebook, this is a genuine Facebook page, Facebook asked a bunch of teenage wheelchair users, what do you hate most about being a wheelchair user? And these are the genuine responses that they got. I'm in a wheelchair, but I sit on my ass and not on my brain. It's surprising and disappointing how often people equate the fact that somebody has a physical disability with the idea that they're also stupid and can't make decisions for themselves. Another child said, they treat me like I'm a child. I want to show you an example of that. I actually did it with my wheelchair user. Do you want to come quickly and sit here? Even an adult wheelchair user is subject to a lot of this. Because the wheelchair user is at the height of a child, somehow the social barriers of appropriate behavior disappear. And there's a lot of this. There's a lot of this. Treating people, adults, thank you, like a child. They treat me like I'm a child. Remember this. Often people talk to whoever I'm with and ignore me completely. Do you remember I asked your friend, does she need any help? Directing questions to the wheelchair user's companion and not to them. So in terms of language, what you could do with a lesson like this is ask, why do all these sentences use the present simple? Has anybody got any idea? Why do we use the present simple? It's because these are things that happen all the time. Present simple. Now, when we get on to more advanced levels, let's say C1, C2, becoming fairly proficient, we have the possibility in our classrooms to talk about more abstract issues and explore in greater depth and stimulate critical thinking. I want you just for a moment to think about words that come into your head when you think about somebody who has a disability. I want you to think about words, and I want you to think about feelings. When you see, I remember your reaction when you saw the dog who had the wheels. Instantly you went, oh, poor thing. I want you to think about feelings and words just for a moment that come into your head when you think about somebody with a disability. This thought bubble of words that I'm going to show you now has been created from a list which shows the top 10 stereotypes of disability. So the words that emerged were words like insecure, dependent, vulnerable, pitiful, innocent, childlike. We also have words like inspirational. You managed to cook for yourself. Wow, that's so great. Inspirational. If I were a wheelchair user today, you might go home and say, you know, I went to this presentation, she presented, even though she was in a wheelchair, just an inspiration to me. Heroes. Wheelchair users are often presented as heroes. These are all stereotypes. In the Western world, we are encouraged, I don't know if encouraged is the right word, but anyway, we have certain aspirations. One of these aspirations is wealth. Another one might be power. Can anyone think of other things that we're encouraged to aspire to in the Western world? What are things considered good to achieve? How do we want to be? Does anyone have any ideas? To be educated, yes. I think to have an attractive appearance is something we're encouraged to aspire to be sexually attractive. To be successful, to achieve things. To have fun, independence, control. These are things which we aspire to in the Western world. I'm going to show you another table look at the sentence carefully because it's quite complicated. The list I'm going to show you is what a person without disabilities, I don't have a disability, so someone like me, what a person without disabilities thinks that a person with disabilities, maybe a wheelchair user, thinks about himself. So it's what I think, you think about yourself. And have a look at how big the gap is between what we're encouraged to aspire to in the Western world and what I think she thinks about herself. I think she's not able to achieve. I think she thinks that she's ugly. I think she thinks she's sexually unattractive. I think she's desperate to be normal like me. This is what I think she thinks about herself. And it's a very big gap. And of course, we also have to think about the idea of a self-fulfilling prophecy, that if I label you with these thoughts, maybe you become them. So, back to the classroom again. Let's see what Andonia Vasiliavou, who is a senior high school teacher in northern Greece, did with some of her students. She teaches at C1, C2 level, and she started her classroom activity with a discussion. And she asked her students, how often do you see people with disabilities in the streets, just going about their normal everyday business, going to the shops, going to the bank, going to pay bills? And these are some of the answers that she got. Now, of course, these answers represent the reality in Greece. I can't answer for how things are in Turkey or how they are in Poland, for example, or in other countries, but this is what she got from her Greek students. Her Greek students said, oh, I don't see wheelchair users very often because there aren't that many. You don't have people with disabilities in Turkey? They can't go out. When Greek people visit other European countries, for example, Britain, I often hear the comment, so many disabled people in Britain. It's not true. It's just that you see them more often. In fact, in terms of statistics, there are 80 million people in the European Union with some kind of disability. That's 1/6 of the population, so that's a big number. She also... 10%, that's the norm, yeah, 10%. She also had the comment, most of the people I see in wheelchairs are beggars. That's a horrific stereotype, to equate somebody who's a wheelchair user with being a beggar. Now, what I'm going to show you now is a short video clip. Let me just put this on, which Andonia showed her students. And I want you to think about that list of what I think she thinks about herself as you're looking at this video clip and see if that's the same picture. Okay, I think you've got the idea. Do you need the lights back on for the film? Can you turn them back on? Thank you very much. Do you think that guy thought what I said I think she thinks about herself? Do you think he thinks that he can't achieve anything, that he's unattractive, that he's ugly? No, possibly not. So anyway, that was an interesting video clip that she used to stimulate her students' interests. So, the next thing that this senior school teacher, Andonia, did with her students was that she used a lesson which prompts them to think about how they react when they see someone with disabilities, to ask themselves, is my reaction to this person with a disability the same as it would be to someone without a disability? Or do I have to make a big conscious effort to see beyond their disability, to see the person that they are? And she gave her students, this lesson is of course available for free on our website, as are all the other lessons. She gave her students a long list of vocabulary items which are all attributes, which all talk about somebody's character. This is just a short selection of that list. And what she asked her students to do was to match this list of words to the pictures. The first picture is somebody's best friend. Is my best friend capable? Is she fun to be with? Is she shy? To use the same words to match them to this young, healthy woman, this athlete sitting on the ground, and then to match the words to the wheelchair user. Now, the words were deliberately selected so that none of them had anything to do with somebody's physical appearance or their physical capabilities. And what emerged was, of course, a stereotyped picture of people assuming things about the wheelchair user which had nothing to do with the person that they are. So she asked them, did you match the words on the basis of somebody's body or on the basis of somebody's soul, who they are? So the students really had to question why they had put certain words with certain people. She did a similar exercise with stereotypes. These are some typical stereotyped images of mobility disability. We have this inspirational figure with their arms up in the air, and we have the Paralympic athlete. So people think carefully about the portrayal of people with mobility disability, the sort of images that are used. So the feedback we got from Andonia was that the warm-up had revealed stereotypes, and the material encouraged them to recognize their own responsibility as citizens. Let's go back to the beginning of my talk when I told you those rather pompous statements about education being used to change the world. But you can see that we're reaching those goals. And one of her students told us that after the lesson, she definitely started thinking differently. And she learned to appreciate her life and deal with her problems differently. So I think we're reaching those goals that we mentioned at the beginning. A school in Thessaloniki, a private language school, decided to do a week-long project with students at all levels using the free teaching material from the Disabled Access Friendly Campaign's website. The teacher who organized this said on Facebook that her students had really enjoyed the projects that they'd done on Halloween and on Christmas, but it was time to work on something of greater significance, something that will make her students more worthy as people, and she chose work from our campaign. And the school as a whole produced an enormous quantity of work and were very, very motivated and enthusiastic about the project. So she was working with students right from very young learners through to proficiency level, and they produced work which, again, went beyond the classroom. Have a look. They made posters for home. They made PowerPoint projects. One of the things that she did was she took a group of students out into the local community, and having already looked at the specifications for buildings, how wide the lifts have to be, at what angle the ramps have to be, they went and did a check. So they went out with tape measures outside the classroom, and on the basis of what they had found, they interviewed the vice mayor, and they ended up writing a letter to the mayor. And I'm going to read to you what one of the students who was involved in this project said. He said, "To be honest, when my teacher told us we were going to do this project, I thought, why don't you kill me now? God help us, I have tests at school, I have private lessons, and I have proficiency exams this May. I don't have time for something like this. But I did my best to kill my feelings. The funny thing is that the whole procedure became quite interesting. We spent a week discussing, watching videos, and researching the legislation on the technical specifications that are required for the buildings. Now, the rest of the community saw these students outside measuring and talking about these issues, and they became aware of the project, and this local language school became sort of a center for information. They became the experts suddenly, and other people in the community started asking them about their work. And the response from the teachers, the parents, and the students was very positive. It was really worth it. They took our work outside into the community. So the head of the school said, the deeper you touch your students, the better the results that you get. Who said that English language teaching has to be divorced from the real world? Think about the textbooks that you use. Do they reflect the real world? And another of her students said the more we did it, the more we learnt, the more we liked it. I realized how difficult some things are for people with mobility disability that the rest of us take for granted. And I really enjoyed the project. And I wouldn't mind taking part in another one in the future. And maybe this boy is going to be the one to change the world. Like we said, Nelson Mandela said, maybe we can change the world through education. Maybe this boy will be the one. But even if he isn't, even if he doesn't change the world, even if you haven't inspired anybody to change the world, if from one of the lessons that you use, you manage to open the eyes of even just one child, if you've allowed them to step into the shoes of somebody else, see life through somebody else's eyes, then you're getting to the heart of education and you're making a positive change. And if you're doing that, you're teaching lessons in life that really matter. Teaching kids to count is fine, but teaching them what counts in life is best. And this last quotation is something I think is very powerful, that the best teachers, the best schools, have always done more than just prepare students for tests. They raise awareness of the world in which we live, and they try to make it a better place. And I would like to thank all of you today for joining me at this presentation. I would like to thank ISTEK for giving me this opportunity to talk to you, and I would like to thank Burlington Books, a publisher, who brought me here today. So I have some leaflets to give you. I'll just show you those. You can use this leaflet in your schools because on one side the leaflet gives all the information about our campaign. The other side is a poster. Even just displaying a poster is a way of raising awareness. So I'd like to give one of those to all of you. Maybe you can help me give them out. I also have a handout here which I want to give you all. This shows you how you can contact us and how you can support us. And there are many ways that you can support us. Just post our website on your Facebook page. Use our material. Talk to your colleagues about what we do. I also would like to offer you the opportunity to contribute teaching material of your own. You're all experienced teachers. You all have experience of the world. You may have an idea how you could raise social awareness about mobility disability in the classroom, and we would be happy to receive your contribution and possibly publish it on our site. So think about those ideas, and I hope that you will join other teachers around the world who are really making a difference. Thank you very much indeed.